This particular vehicle, out of the three 1.17 update vehicles, although of course nowhere near as culturally significant to Gran Turismo players as the Suzuki Escudo, which would pretty much overshadow anything it's in a pack with, this one is actually a car which I have a lot of love for, and I had a lot of love for even before I drove it, because of what this car represents in Gran Turismo. And Suzuki with the Escudo kind of does the same thing, but this I would say even more so, and that is something which Forza, in my opinion, has always done very well, and Gran Turismo really used to, but then for some reason they kind of moved away from it, and that is to have an eclectic mix of types of car. Not just different manufacturers, but wildly different eras, styles, and say what you will about the latest Horizon games, 3, 4 and 5, they do a fantastic job of having all these different kinds of car intermingle. That is why I love to see a car like this in Gran Turismo, because this is very much a Forza Horizon kind of car, a 1932 Ford Roadster. Now this is a custom, of course, a reworked version of that original 32. It has a 5.4 litre engine. Don't expect some 1000 horsepower monster though, because in its stock form it's a very, very modest car. For those who maybe can't find it in the game, it's in the Hagerty dealership for, at the moment at least, 450,000 credits, so about on par with a Group 3 race car. Some people may think that's a bit steep. Personally, 450 grand's pretty easy to come by in the game, so I'm not too bothered by that. I was expecting it to be maybe 200,000 or 300,000, so it wasn't too far off. But in terms of the spec, like I said, it's not going to break any records. It's got just under 180 horsepower, but it only weighs about 1100 kilos, which isn't too bad. It is of course front engine, it's rear-wheel drive, naturally aspirated, and the performance points are very low because the power, of course, is very low. It's only 410, which is, as I said, super low, gives you a ton of tuning potential, but even if you don't tune it, it could be a pretty interesting choice of car for lower PP events. Maybe detune it to 400, maybe tune it up to 450 or even 500, and of course there are those who maybe haven't bought it yet who are curious, what can this be tuned up to? Now, I'm not sure about engine swaps. There might be one or two that can apply to this car that I honestly haven't looked into, but in terms of tuning the standard engine, you can get this thing to put out well over 300 horses. So that's not bad at all. You can also drop the weight, and when it's already 1100 to begin with, that's always a good sign. Now, in terms of the raw performance, straight out of the box, which is how I'm driving it here, it comes on comfort tyres. The aforementioned low amount of power means it's very forgiving, and even though it definitely has that classic, or in this case vintage I guess, style of almost sliding your way through corners where you steer more so with the throttle than the actual steering wheel, which is always a nice authentic old school experience to have in a game, more commonly thought of with those old school open wheel Grand Prix machines like the Silver Arrows. This one, although nowhere near that quick, offers a similar kind of vibe. So for those who are into older cars, much older cars, as I certainly am in Gran Turismo, how precious few vintage cars we actually have in the series, it's great fun to drive it. It feels authentic, but it also feels slightly updated. For example, it has wider tyres than it would have had back then, the brakes are definitely more effective than they would have been, and even the power itself, of course, is a lot higher. The performance isn't breathtaking, especially when it comes to gearing, which is not too surprising for an American classic. They didn't exactly have the best ratios around. Acceleration is fine, the sound is pretty nice as well. Top end speed, not so much. Tops out, what you can see in the video, up around 110, 120-ish if I recall correctly. But the handling is pretty nice. The car itself, although you could say heavy for its size, but I would say it's still fairly light for a large engine vehicle, it does feel quite compact. So you can very much chuck this thing around, and at least with the standard power, there are very little ramifications for that. It's not going to snap back, it's not going to suddenly squeal off the track and slam into a wall unless you really overcook it and just don't even try. You can have this thing sideways all the time and control it quite handily, really. Now, in terms of using this thing for racing, it's certainly a different approach, and that is very much so my kind of thing, so I will absolutely be looking more into tuning this, seeing what it's like off-road, seeing what it's like on-road, maybe even as a little drag car of some kind. I could definitely see people using this as kind of a multi-purpose, specialist, niche little oddball vehicle, and I am all for that. Like I said, I love those kind of cars in Gran Turismo. The Escudo itself is like the epitome of that, in terms of being super wacky, but also super useful. This one, totally out of left field choice. I don't believe this was a GT award winner, if I recall correctly. So yeah, it's just a nice surprise to have it in the game. And for those who didn't see, of course, recently I put out a huge data mining leaked list of at least some, if not all, probably not all, but at least some of the cars that are potentially due to come back in Gran Turismo 7 and some to make their debut. There are a couple more vehicles like this which are the more wacky style. As far as I'm concerned, I am all for that. I need more of that back in Gran Turismo, I want more of that back, and even though there are probably tons of players, I would imagine probably some players who are newer to the series, who might not care so much about having wacky stuff and might just want the latest and greatest, you know, your Porsche 918s, Zenvos, Spikers, all that kind of stuff, which I admittedly also love. To me, one of the strongest things about Gran Turismo was always that it just had unexpected, sometimes seemingly boring cars, duplicates notwithstanding, but which gave the game character. Gran Turismo is still, as far as I know, the only series to, for example, feature my car, the automatic Mitsubishi Evo. They didn't need to do that. Most people certainly wouldn't have missed it if it weren't there, but they did it. That isn't really a part of the game so much anymore, which is why cars like this, and some of the other crazy ones, of course the returning Chaparral 2J, the Escudo itself, various others peppered in here and there, they do stand out so much. And I would be curious, if you are a newer player to the series, tell me down below, what do you think of these kind of vehicles? Not necessarily the Vision GT kind of wacky, but the real wacky stuff, you know, like this car. Real cars that are just totally different to the expected. Are you a fan of this? Do you want more of it? Or maybe do you prefer having just the latest and greatest? Because it could just be us OGs who prefer the wacky stuff, but it could be something which lives on in the newer generation who have joined Gran Turismo in Sport or 7. So I'd be curious to know that. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts on this 32 Ford. Great addition in my opinion, and a lovely little car to work with, and of course, a fantastic canvas to paint from, although the vast majority in the livery search are, as you'd expect, black with flames, and with a few rusty ones in there as well. So get creative with the car, it certainly is open to that. Not too many visual upgrades, unfortunately. Would have been nice to maybe put a roof on it or put fenders back on, but there you go. I'm just thinking Forza Horizon there. Ultimately though, that's it for my thoughts. Slap yours down below, and of course stick around on the channel for more. I will also be featuring, of course, my thoughts on the Group 3 category Suzuki, the Vision GT, in the coming days, so of course stick around for that as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.